The air inside the Deadwood County Auction Barn was thick with the scent of old timber, straw, and restless secrets. 11 rugged cowboys and one lone woman leaned against the railing of pen 20116, their eyes locked on a scene that had silenced every bid and hushed every boast. In the center, the mare Emberhoof lay trembling in a nest of fresh hay, her flanks rising and falling in labored rhythm. Beside her, the foal Ghostwind shivered, its tiny chest fluttering between life and something darker. Axel Deadwood, broad-shouldered and cold-eyed, had never missed a cattle sale in 20 years. But now, all he could do was grip the splintered rail until his knuckles ached. Next to him, Jasper Bloodthorn spat softly onto the dirt floor, the tough edge of his voice gone as he murmured, "Come on, Emberhoof, don't quit on us now." Ryder Blackthorn, arms crossed tight against his chest, kept his eyes on Ghostwind, each tiny kick from the foal twisting something deep inside him that he thought was long dead. Zeke Silverfang, with his silver-streaked beard and restless fingers, found himself whispering an old prayer he hadn't spoken since his father's funeral. Draven Redcoyote, silent as a shadow, stood near Sierra Wolfheart, who wiped at the corner of her eye, hoping none of these iron-hearted men would notice her tears. Around them, Salem Ironsoul and Nova Stormblade watched with clenched jaws. No one dared speak above Emberhoof's exhausted grunts and the faint, struggling gasps of Ghostwind. Outside, thunder cracked, rolling over the barn roof like distant cannon fire. Rain soon followed, tapping in a steady rhythm against the tin, but no one cared. Cain Ashhowl and Echo Darkspur, both known for never backing down from a fight, leaned closer, helpless now that this fight was beyond muscle and grit. Only Emberhoof's will and Ghostwind's fragile heartbeat could decide the ending. Then, for one breathless second, hope found them all. Ghostwind's tiny ribs lifted stronger, a ragged cough scraped its throat, and the foal twitched its damp ears. Sierra pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Jasper squeezed Axel's shoulder, the gesture rough but filled with unspoken brotherhood. No gold in this barn could match what they witnessed in that single heartbeat of stubborn life. But just as quickly, a violent shudder rattled through Ghostwind's fragile body. Its thin legs kicked weakly, then fell still. A silence heavier than thunder pressed down on every soul in that barn. In the hush, Axel Deadwood exhaled a single word no one expected from him: "Fight!" The barn rattled as the wind pushed against its old boards, but inside, 12 souls stood frozen around pen 20116. Axel Deadwood clenched his fists so tight his nails bit into his palms. Ghostwind lay barely breathing, its tiny ribs moving just enough to pull hope back from the edge of despair. Emberhoof, drained but defiant, nudged her foal again and again, a mother's instinct refusing to surrender even when nature seemed ready to. Jasper Bloodthorn finally broke the silence. "We can't just stand here, damn it. This foal needs more than prayers." His voice cut through the pounding rain on the roof. Ryder Blackthorn nodded, his jaw flexing with tension. "We need to get a vet here now, or he won't see the sun come up." Zeke Silverfang pulled his old phone from his coat pocket, fingers trembling as he dialed the only large animal vet he trusted within 50 miles. Sierra Wolfheart stepped closer to Emberhoof, her boots sinking into the straw. She spoke softly, her voice a calm anchor in the storm. "Easy, girl. Hold him close. We're not losing him tonight." Draven Redcoyote, usually as silent as midnight, spoke for the first time, his low voice steady. "Sierra's right. Keep her calm. Ghostwind needs her warmth more than anything." Salem Ironsoul and Nova Stormblade exchanged a look, two hard men now forced to rely on kindness and fragile hope. Outside, the rain turned into a hammering sheet, drumming so loud it almost drowned out Ghostwind's tiny, raspy breaths. Cain Ashhowl kicked at the dirt floor, cursing under his breath. Echo Darkspur, who rarely showed fear, knelt by the rail, eyes locked on the foal. He whispered as if Ghostwind could hear, "Don't quit on us, little spirit. You're meant to run these fields someday." Axel Deadwood paced behind them all, his boots striking the barn planks in a steady, angry rhythm. Memories flooded him. His father's ranch failing after a storm just like this, his mother's voice telling him sometimes life takes more than it gives. But tonight, he refused to lose again. He turned to Zeke, voice sharp. "Is Doc Langford coming or not?" Zeke pressed the phone hard against his ear, nodding with relief when he caught the vet's words over the static. "He's on his way. He says to keep the foal warm, don't let him get cold, or it's over." Sierra didn't wait for permission. She shrugged off her thick canvas coat and laid it gently over Ghostwind's back. One by one, the others followed, layering their own warmth over fragile life. As thunder cracked once more above them, 12 stubborn souls stood guard over a fight too small for most men to notice, but too precious for any of them to abandon. And while the storm raged, a fragile heartbeat beneath borrowed coats beat on, daring the dawn to come. Outside the old barn, lightning split the night sky into jagged veins of white fire. Inside, 12 rugged figures formed an unspoken circle around Emberhoof and her fragile foal. The warmth of layered coats clung to Ghostwind's tiny body, while Emberhoof's breath misted the air in steady, exhausted puffs. Axel Deadwood didn't dare blink, afraid that if he looked away for even a heartbeat, Ghostwind's fight might slip into the shadows forever. Jasper Bloodthorn paced back and forth just beyond the pen, muttering curses and prayers in the same breath. He caught Ryder Blackthorn's eye. 2 men who'd once fought each other over grazing rights now bound together by a single trembling life. Ryder, never one to show emotion, pressed a steady hand to Emberhoof's flank, feeling her heartbeat echo through his palm. "Easy, girl. He needs you steady," he murmured, his voice soft enough to be swallowed by the storm. Near the gate, Zeke Silverfang strained to hear the faint howl of a truck engine through the pounding rain. Doc Langford had promised he'd come, but every minute dragged like an hour. Sierra Wolfheart crouched close to Ghostwind, whispering gentle words the way her grandmother once calmed frightened colts. Draven Redcoyote stood at her back, his shadow a silent shield against the night's chaos. Salem Ironsoul and Nova Stormblade kept their eyes on the barn door, ready to drag Doc Langford in the moment his headlights cut through the black. Kane Ashhowl, arms crossed like a sentry, fought to keep doubt off his face, but his mind replayed every animal he'd lost under storms just like this. Echo Darkspur, still kneeling, brushed straw away from Ghostwind's muzzle, trying to clear the foal's breathing passage as Emberhoof licked him with what little strength she had left. Axel Deadwood finally spoke, his voice gravel and thunder. "Nobody leaves this barn till he's standing. Nobody." It wasn't a command. It was a vow that made every head nod in silent agreement. 12 stubborn hearts, bound not by blood but by a single fragile spark that refused to die. Then, through the roar of rain, a flicker of hope, headlights slicing through the downpour. Zeke shouted over his shoulder, "It's Langford. He made it." In that instant, the tension broke just enough for Sierra to squeeze Draven's hand, and for Jasper to exhale the breath he'd been holding for what felt like forever. But the wind slammed the barn door wide as the vet stumbled in, dripping wet and eyes wide at the sight before him. One look at Ghostwind and Doc Langford's expression hardened, a man ready to fight death itself if these cowboys could hold back the storm just a little longer. Doc Langford wasted no time. He dropped his soaked coat near the door and knelt beside Ghostwind, hands moving with a precision that came from decades of pulling life back from the brink. Axel Deadwood and Jasper Bloodthorn flanked him like loyal guards, their eyes locked on every needle and tube the vet unpacked from a battered leather bag older than some of the men in that barn. Ryder Blackthorn helped hold Emberhoof's halter, whispering to her in a low voice meant to calm her trembling muscles. Zeke Silverfang handed Doc Langford a clean cloth, then stepped back, wiping rainwater and sweat from his brow with a sleeve that smelled of horse and old leather. Sierra Wolfheart stayed close to Ghostwind's head, one hand resting lightly behind the foal's ear. Her touch seemed to remind him that warmth still existed, even when the world outside roared with cold and wind. Draven Redcoyote leaned against a beam behind Sierra, arms crossed, dark eyes tracking every shudder and cough from Ghostwind's tiny chest. Salem Ironsoul and Nova Stormblade stood near the open barn door, blocking the worst of the wind with their broad shoulders. Each gust that hit them carried the smell of wet earth and a promise that the storm wasn't done yet. Kane Ashhowl found himself whispering to Echo Darkspur, voices too low for the others to hear. "Ever seen a fight like this?" Echo shook his head slowly, eyes locked on the foal's fragile ribs. "Never. But if any creature's got fire in its bones, it's this little ghost." That thought lit something in Kane's chest, a tiny spark of faith he didn't even know he had left. Doc Langford pressed a stethoscope to Ghostwind's side, listening, frowning, then looking up at Axel. "He's colder than he should be. We've got to keep the heat on him, get sugar in him, and pray his lungs hold. Somebody get me hot water bottles, blankets, anything you can heat fast." Without a word, Ryder and Jasper bolted toward the tackroom, boots thudding over the wooden planks, urgency driving every step. Back at the pen, Sierra leaned closer, her voice a trembling lullaby. "Hold on, Ghostwind. You're stronger than this storm, baby. You hear me?" Around her, the circle of worn-out cowboys and one iron-hearted woman pulled tighter, shoulders brushing as they blocked the storm's reach. Outside, the thunder rolled again, but inside, a tiny heartbeat drummed on, refusing to yield, as if daring the dark to come closer. Steam curled from the metal buckets Jasper Bloodthorn and Ryder Blackthorn hauled back from the tackroom. Inside, water heated over old propane burners hissed and spit like a snake cornered in the dark. Doc Langford wrapped hot cloths and laid them gently along Ghostwind's belly and legs, his breath visible in the cold barn air as he worked with the quiet urgency of a man who'd seen too many close calls. Axel Deadwood hovered near Emberhoof's head, whispering soft words that only she could hear. Her ears twitched at his voice, and despite her exhaustion, she leaned her damp muzzle into his chest for a moment that said more than words ever could. Zeke Silverfang handed another steaming towel to Sierra Wolfheart, who knelt so close to Ghostwind that her own warmth mixed with the foal's labored breath. Outside, the storm raged on, the roof rattling with wind that threatened to peel it away plank by plank. Salem Ironsoul and Nova Stormblade took turns bracing the heavy barn door every time a gust threatened to slam it open again. Each time they shoved it shut, they exchanged a glance, a silent promise that nothing would drag death through that doorway without fighting them first. Draven Redcoyote moved quietly behind Doc Langford, fetching syringes and clean gauze from the battered bag. His big hands, usually so quick to swing a rope or drive a stubborn bull, worked gently tonight, as if the fragile line between life and death could snap with just a careless breath. Echo Darkspur stood behind him, whispering rough encouragements that drifted into Ghostwind's ears like tiny embers of hope. Kane Ashhowl watched them all, a rare softness cutting through the iron in his eyes. He caught Axel's glance and nodded once, a wordless pact that no one would leave until Ghostwind chose whether to stay or go. Emberhoof stirred weakly, letting out a low whinny that tugged at every man's chest like a mother calling her child back from the dark. Then a sound, so small they almost missed it over the roar of rain, broke the breathless stillness. Ghostwind let out a tiny squeal, more air than voice, but enough to make Sierra gasp and press her hand to her mouth. Doc Langford's eyes snapped open wider than they'd been all night. He leaned closer, listening to the foal's chest with renewed hope. Somewhere in that frail rhythm, a heartbeat declared to the storm outside, "Not yet. Not tonight." The barn felt smaller now, its creaking beams and rattling tin roof closing in around the circle of rough men and the single woman who refused to back down. Ghostwind's faint squeal still echoed in Sierra Wolfheart's ears as she stroked his tiny neck, her hand trembling with hope she barely dared to name. Axel Deadwood glanced at Doc Langford, searching his lined face for anything that would say this battle was won, but the vet's eyes stayed cautious, his hands never resting. Jasper Bloodthorn wiped sweat from his brow, though the cold inside the barn had not warmed. Ryder Blackthorn squeezed his shoulder, no words needed between them now. They had fought droughts, lost cattle, buried kin. But tonight, A creature not even 3 hours old bound them more tightly than blood. Zeke Silverfang stood by Emberhoof's head, murmuring softly as the mare pressed her nose into his chest, drawing calm from his steady heartbeat. Outside, the wind screamed like a wounded beast, rattling every loose nail in the walls. Nova Stormblade and Salem Ironsoul braced the door once more as it bucked on rusty hinges. Each time they slammed it shut, they cursed the storm under their breath, vowing to hold back the cold that death would ride through if they faltered for even a second. Draven Redcoyote hovered close behind Doc Langford, who now injected a slow stream of warm glucose into Ghostwind's tiny vein. Draven's eyes tracked every drop, his fists clenched at his sides, knuckles white as bone. Echo Darkspur whispered to Ghostwind again, his rough voice gentler than any lullaby, "Run in your dreams, little warrior. Run until you can stand." Cain Ashhowl heard him and swallowed hard, remembering the last foal he'd lost and refusing to bury another. Suddenly, Emberhoof lifted her head higher than she had all night, her ears flicking forward. A spark lit in her eyes, weary but fierce. She nudged Ghostwind's side, harder than before, as if ordering him to get up right then and there. Sierra caught her breath, fingers frozen on the foal's neck. The tiny legs twitched, hooves scraping the straw. Doc Langford leaned back, voice hushed but certain. "He's trying." Axel Deadwood stepped closer, his boots sinking into the soaked straw, and dropped to one knee beside Sierra. His voice, usually iron, broke into something softer than any man there had ever heard. "Come on, Ghostwind, stand for your mama. Show this storm who you are." Outside, thunder rolled again, but inside, 12 cowboys and one iron-hearted woman held their breath as a miracle gathered its strength under borrowed coats and a mother's unbreakable love. Rain hammered the old tin roof in a relentless rhythm, but inside the barn, silence ruled. Axel Deadwood stayed kneeling in the straw beside Sierra Wolfheart, both barely daring to breathe. All eyes locked on Ghostwind, whose tiny hooves scraped again at the bedding, each twitch pulling these worn-out ranchers deeper into a hope they could taste but still feared to trust. Doc Langford pulled his stethoscope from Ghostwind's chest, listening for a heartbeat stronger than the wind rattling the walls. He nodded once, a flicker of relief crossing his tired face. Jasper Bloodthorn squeezed Ryder Blackthorn's shoulder, whispering rough words that sounded like a prayer wrapped in a curse. Zeke Silverfang leaned closer to Emberhoof's head, stroking her mane as she nickered softly, her breath brushing his wrist like a promise not yet broken. Salem Ironsoul and Nova Stormblade fought another gust at the door, their boots braced in the mud creeping in from the storm. Water pooled under their feet, but neither flinched. "Hold it!" Salem barked as the door slammed again. "Nothing gets in to steal him now. Nothing." Nova nodded, gritting his teeth, feeling the cold drip down his collar but refusing to step away from his post. Draven Redcoyote's shadow fell across Sierra as she leaned closer to Ghostwind, murmuring steady encouragement. Echo Darkspur crouched near the foal's flank, gently brushing straw from its trembling legs. Cain Ashhowl wiped his palms on his jeans, whispering to himself that this night would end different than all the others, that this one, by sheer grit alone, would not end in sorrow. Then it happened, small and staggering but real. Ghostwind lifted his head, blinking big dark eyes at the circle of humans who had traded warmth, coats, and tears for a chance at this moment. Emberhoof nudged him again, harder this time. With a choked grunt, the foal's legs folded, then pushed against the straw. His front knees buckled, but he did not quit, the will of storms and blood in a body barely bigger than a saddlebag. Axel's breath caught in his chest as Ghostwind strained again, his tiny hooves scrabbling for purchase on the slippery straw. Sierra pressed both hands against her lips to stifle a sob when the foal, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane, managed to lift himself halfway before sinking again. But even as he fell back down, his eyes stayed wide open, flicking to Emberhoof's tired face, a promise passing between mother and son that neither the storm nor death itself could break tonight. Inside the battered barn, a hush lingered between each heartbeat as Ghostwind lay curled against Emberhoof's flank. Axel Deadwood's pulse thundered in his ears louder than the rain pounding the roof above them. He clenched and unclenched his fists, silently urging strength into the fragile bones of the foal who had stolen the hearts of men too stubborn to cry. Yet tonight, more than one face shone wet under the flickering overhead light. Sierra Wolfheart tucked her coat tighter around Ghostwind's back, her fingers brushing his damp fur as she whispered softly, "You're almost there, little warrior. Show us you belong under these wide skies." Jasper Bloodthorn exhaled hard, shaking his head at Ryder Blackthorn. "Didn't think I'd ever stand in a damn auction barn, praying over a half-born foal," he muttered, but his rough grin betrayed a hope deeper than his words. Zeke Silverfang, still at Emberhoof's head, leaned down to kiss the mare's forehead, murmuring words only she could understand. Salem Ironsoul and Nova Stormblade wrestled the door shut once more as a savage gust tore through the crack and flung straw against the pen rails. "Hold, damn you!" Salem roared at the wind, as if the storm itself might obey a voice forged by seasons of loss and survival. Draven Redcoyote wiped sweat from his brow and caught Echo Darkspur's eye. "He's fighting," Draven said, his voice low but certain. Echo nodded, grinning despite the tension. "Yeah. He's got more fire in him than half the bulls we've broke this year." Cain Ashhowl let out a short bark of laughter at that, the sound cutting through the hush like a spark. Even in this moment, the barn pulsed with a living thing stronger than any thunder outside. Hope. With a sudden grunt, Ghostwind braced his tiny hooves against the straw once more. Emberhoof's soft whinny wrapped around him like a rope pulling him up from the mud of death. His spindly legs wobbled dangerously but did not buckle. Sierra's hand trembled on Axel's shoulder as they both leaned forward, barely breathing. Ghostwind lifted his head higher, nostrils flaring as he tasted the heavy air that carried rain and life in equal measure. And then, like dawn cracking open a storm-torn night, Ghostwind pushed himself fully upright. He stood there, trembling, damp, yet defiant, a single heartbeat of victory glowing in his wide eyes. Around him, 12 cowboys and one iron-hearted woman forgot the cold, the rain, and the wind clawing at the barn. They only saw a promise standing on 4 shaky legs, proving that even in the darkest storms, something wild and brave could rise and breathe. Ghostwind stood in the center of pen 20116, legs quivering but locked firm, as if the whole storm outside had gathered inside his fragile bones and turned to steel. Axel Deadwood rose slowly from the straw, boots creaking as he stepped closer, afraid that even his shadow might knock the foal down again. He reached out a hand but paused inches from Ghostwind's damp mane, letting the colt claim this moment without help, a fight won by his own heart. Sierra Wolfheart let out a breath that turned to laughter on her lips, the sound breaking through the last fear clinging to the barn rafters. She pressed her palm to Emberhoof's neck, feeling the mare's steady pulse match her own. "You did it, girl. He's yours, all yours," she whispered, her words a promise carried on the scent of rain drifting through the gaps in the old boards. Jasper Bloodthorn thumped Ryder Blackthorn on the back so hard it made the younger man grunt, but neither cared. "Never thought I'd see the day a newborn foal'd humble a bunch of stubborn fools like us," Jasper said, voice rough with something close to wonder. Ryder chuckled, wiping a sleeve across damp eyes that had nothing to do with the storm. "Ain't over yet. He's got a long road to run." Zeke Silverfang dropped to one knee near Ghostwind, his tired knees creaking louder than the storm now fading outside. He let the foal sniff his hand, smiling when a tiny velvet nose bumped against his palm. "Run far, little ghost. Make every mile worth this night," he murmured, knowing well that he and these men would speak of this moment until their bones turned to dust. Salem Ironsoul and Nova Stormblade finally let the heavy barn door swing wide. Morning crept in with the first pale streaks of sunrise breaking the bruised sky. The storm had blown itself out, leaving behind puddles and the fresh scent of wet earth, and inside, a story these men would tell long after the last fence post rotted under open skies. Draven Redcoyote stood back with Cain Ashhowl and Echo Darkspur, watching Ghostwind nuzzle closer to Emberhoof's side. The colt's tail flicked once, his ears twitching to catch every new sound this dawn brought him. Around him, the 12 ranchers and one iron-hearted woman traded tired smiles and rough handshakes. In this old auction barn, beneath the quiet hush of a spent storm, they all understood one truth. Sometimes it takes every soul in the room to keep one heartbeat alive. And Ghostwind had given them back something they didn't know they'd lost, the wild promise that hope, once born, does not kneel. Ghostwind wobbled on his new legs, leaning into Emberhoof's warm side as dawn poured gold through the cracks in the barn's weathered boards. Axel Deadwood stood back, arms crossed over his broad chest, a rare softness tugging at the edges of his stern face. He'd seen cattle lost to storms, men broken by droughts, but this foal, this scrap of life wrapped in soaked straw and stubborn breath, had reminded him that not every fight ends in sorrow. Sierra Wolfheart stepped forward first, her boots crunching over damp straw as she reached out. Ghostwind lifted his tiny head, ears flicking forward to catch her quiet laugh. She stroked his soft neck, murmuring, "You're gonna run these pastures wild, little spirit. Faster than any storm can chase you." Jasper Bloodthorn nudged Ryder Blackthorn beside him. "We'll be telling this tale till our beards turn white and fall off," he teased, his voice raspy from a night of shouted prayers and curses. Zeke Silverfang moved closer to Emberhoof, pressing his forehead gently to hers. He breathed in the smell of her sweat and straw and new life, something timeless that made the years in his bones slip away for just a heartbeat. Salem Ironsoul and Nova Stormblade leaned against the now quiet barn door, watching the sun break open the battered clouds. They exchanged a glance, two men too rough for pretty words, but whose silence said they'd carry this night with them forever. Draven Redcoyote squatted next to Echo Darkspur, both staring at Ghostwind's spindly legs testing the straw beneath them. Cain Ashhowl joined them, arms draped over the railing as he spoke low, more to himself than to anyone else. "Maybe that's what life's about. Not just surviving storms, but standing up after 'em, even if your legs shake so bad you think they'll break." Outside, the storm had left the ranch soaked and glistening. Puddles reflected the new sun like mirrors laid out for ghosts to peer into. From somewhere far across the pasture, the first brave birds sang at the edge of the fresh dawn. The men and Sierra listened, each feeling the tired ache in their shoulders lighten, just a little. What they'd done here tonight wasn't about money or pride. It was about standing shoulder to shoulder and saying, "Not today, death. Not this one." Ghostwind braced himself, pushed away from Emberhoof, and took one shaky step toward Sierra's waiting hand. A chorus of ragged laughter and cheers filled the barn, rolling out into the morning like thunder reborn as hope. Axel Deadwood let out a low whistle, tipping his hat back to let the sun warm his lined face. Somewhere deep inside him, and in every soul gathered there, lay the same quiet vow, that fields wide enough and hearts strong enough could carry even the smallest heartbeat through any storm.